Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for this first of our Fiscal Open Office Hours sessions. We're going to take a minute or two just to let everybody join. You know how it takes a little bit of time to do that, but thank you for being with us this afternoon. If you would, just please make sure that you're muted, just so we can make sure there's no background noise. But uh, just want to let you all know you're certainly free and encouraged to unmute yourself if you have a question. We definitely want to encourage that environment today. Also, you can feel free to use the chat if you'd rather go that route. We'll be monitoring that and making sure that our presenters today are aware of your questions there too. So multiple avenues for you to get your questions answered. So we're pretty excited about this series and excited to have our presenters with us today. So settle in, make sure you got plenty of popcorn, and we'll get started in just a minute. For those of you just joining us, we're just waiting for everybody to kind of settle in and for the joining to kind of slow down. We've got a good crowd today, which that's exciting. Looking forward to the conversation. Looking forward to our presenters who are joining us today. And just maybe another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll get started. Looks like registrations are starting to slow, so we will go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody, to the first of our Fiscal Open Office Hours sessions. Today, we're going to focus on cost allocation. That's a pretty meaty subject, so hope you're ready for a lot of question and answer. We've got a fantastic team joining us today. First thing I'll ask is, if you haven't already, please mute yourself so we've got a nice quiet background and no interruptions, that sort of thing. But I do want to encourage anybody and everybody to ask whatever questions you have as they arise, so you can unmute yourself to do that. Or you can put your questions in the chat. We'll be monitoring that actively to make sure that your questions get answered as you have them. We really hope to encourage an active question and answer environment here today. So this is all about getting your questions asked and answered. And if the presenters can't answer your question today, we will definitely get an answer back to you. So don't feel like you can't ask anything of our folks today. All right, so with that, I do want to introduce our two presenters. Andrew Ferguson, first of all, our presenters come to us from James Moore and Company. And both of them have a lot of experience in the field in fiscal operations. So Andrew Ferguson is a senior manager with James Moore and Company. He's got 7 years of professional auditing and accounting experience with a primary focus in nonprofit organizations, with a lot of that focused on community action agencies and Head Start programs. So a lot of work in OMB, uniform guidance. And Andrew and Amy, who I'll introduce in a moment, just recently assisted NASCSP in the project that we did, doing a week-long monitoring in District of Columbia, an agency. So we got to see firsthand their level of experience and comfort with this subject matter. So we're confident they'll be able to answer your questions and are fluent in this material. So Amy brings tons of experience, 20 years of financial management and grant accounting experience to her work. She was a CFO with a community action agency and specializes in fiscal systems and designing training curricula around fund accounting. She was with us as well in DC, was definitely critical to being able to close out the fiscal monitoring aspect of that agency monitoring. So please give them a really big virtual round of applause and welcome to joining us on these 4 sessions that we'll be hosting. This is the first of those 4. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew to lead the session.
All right. Great. Thank you, Hugh. And I just want to reiterate what has been said. I mean, we're just really excited to be here, excited to be a part of these next few calls. It's been great just to be able to work so far alongside Hugh and get to know the work that NASCSP is doing. So just really looking forward to the next. I think we have 4 calls, 4 sessions that we've planned already. And we already have called just a small audible as we got into cost allocation and started thinking about that and hearing back from y'all as far as the material and the questions you had and kind of the particular things that y'all wanted to address. We realized it would be very difficult to put that into only an hour and a half, especially because we really want these sessions to be interactive. We don't want them just to be us going through a slide deck. We really want there to be question and answer, there to be a chance for you all to comment in the chat. We have multiple polls today, not just to make sure you're listening, but more so just to get your feedback and get interaction. So our plan moving forward, we're going to have cost allocation part 1 today, and then we'll move into cost allocation part 2 during our June call. The thought being we can kind of build a base of knowledge during this first call. And then going into our next call, what we'll do is we'll actually do the hands-on stuff, go through some case studies, go through some allocation exercises. And so that's our plan. And I'm really looking forward to it. I'm going to go ahead. What I'll do is I'm going to share my screen and we'll get this presentation here set up. Let's see. And while I get that going, Amy, would you like to just do a brief introduction of yourself? I know Hugh's given us both great bios.
Sure. Yeah. Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are, everyone. My name's Amy. I'm a senior manager in our outsourced accounting division. I work specifically on the nonprofit team, and I focus almost exclusively on grant-funded nonprofits. I've been doing this for about 25 years. For 5 years, I was the CFO at a community action agency in Florida. And I really love community action. I love the mission. I love what it does. And I'm really excited. And I also really love compliance. I enjoy reading like the uniform guidance and stuff and figuring things out and training people on it. So this is kind of a perfect convergence of things for me.
Excellent. Well, I am like Amy, just to tag along with Amy, I'm also very much involved in the community action space. Amy comes from kind of the controllership side, CFO side. I come from the audit side. My primary bread and butter is I'm an auditor with the primary emphasis on community action agencies. Obviously CSBG is a part of that. I've been with the firm for about 8 years now, and just excited to dive into this today. This is a beefy topic, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I've already done that. So our learning objectives today are pretty straightforward, but this is, like we said, it's a beefy topic. So that there's a lot of facets to cost allocation and what it looks like, what it's for, and then just some of the nuances of looking at cost allocation within the CSBG kind of ecosystem. So our goals today is that you're going to be able to define just the key federal cost allocation requirements that are applicable to CSBG, be able to distinguish between direct cost, indirect cost, admin cost, and program costs. I know that's can be incredibly confusing as far as the indirect versus the direct versus the admin versus program, between uniform guidance and CSBG and just the different language that's used in those two documents. We're going to be able to identify the characteristics of an acceptable cost allocation methodology. And then we're going to close our session today by looking at common CSBG monitoring issues and maybe some red flags that are common when you're monitoring CSBG cost allocation. That is going to bring us to our first poll, and I'm going to try using the Zoom poll. I'll launch it here, and it should be pushed to your windows. The question is, how confident are you in reviewing cost allocation methodologies during monitoring? First being very confident, somewhat confident, neutral, not very confident, and then needs significant improvement. Again, this is not just to make sure you're paying attention. This is more just to get a sense of who y'all are. Where are you at today as we approach this topic, as we dive in.
And it's anonymous, so you can answer honestly. It's fine.
Yes, please. Yes. We are not recording. We're not recording author responses. So looks like we are getting. I'll give just a few more seconds for the poll, but looks like we are. There's 40% about not very confident. 20% about neutral. A third of y'all are somewhat confident, and then 8% very confident. The very confident folks, y'all are welcome to hop in and start teaching this. That'd be awesome. Otherwise, we'll keep going here. So we got 51. Yeah. Amy, what do you think, just off the top of your head, what are some difficulties in monitoring cost allocation? I know we're going to get into the meat here in just a minute, but just like high level, when you think about cost allocation, you think about monitoring it. What makes it so hard from agency to agency?
You can drop that in the chat if you want to. If you don't want to come off mute and just yell, you can do that too.
What would you say, do you think? Is it that everyone's different?
I would say everyone is different. Every agency is slightly different. You have to develop quickly, because you're monitoring, so you're not there for long. You have to quickly develop a sense of what their programs are. Yes, every agency runs their agency differently. Absolutely. And part of identifying cost allocation is you have to rapidly get an understanding of how that agency is operating their agency.
It looks like everybody has responded. We have a pretty good cross section here. No one needs significant improvement, that's great. But again, looks like this is a great cross section for the material we have planned today.
Yes, again, very true. Variety of programs and resources brings different funding requirements, and you have to, and when you're specifically looking at the CSBG dollars, they are very flexible as far as what you can do with your programming. So it does make it harder.
All right, I just pushed our second poll question. This is more similar vein of just getting a good sense of where y'all are at today. But which areas creates the most monitoring challenges for you personally? Is it the personnel allocations, the shared occupancy cost, indirect cost rates, documentation deficiencies at the agencies being monitored, or perhaps even administrative cost limitations?
We have some great observations. Yes, CSBG traditional tasks that admin type tasks can be direct program tasks when it comes to CSBG. Yes, even I'm sure Andrew in his audit work, and I know I do a lot of CFO and controller level consulting work, and I do find many agencies that struggle to understand the cost allocation methodology and then how to apply it, especially if they have a set of books that is not set up to properly manage that.
All right, we'll give this just about 30 more seconds. This looks like a pretty even.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's
All
about
right.
24% documentation, 29% consistency and allocability, and then 18% of reasonableness. Saying reasonableness is the biggest challenge. All right, well, that was helpful, just to help us know kind of where everyone is at as we get started here. I'm going to close that out. There we go. And then we are going to keep moving. And what we're going to do now is we're just going to, go back to the basics here. And I recognize for a group like this that there are some where this next section, you're going to be like, yes, I've known that, and I've known that for decades. But we do want to kind of lay a foundation here of what we're working with. What are the regulatory sources that when we consider cost allocation or we're considering the cost allocation framework, where are we getting the information? Where do we get our regulatory? What are our regulatory sources? And those two are what you would expect. It's CSBG and uniform guidance. So your cost allocation is going to be governed in CSBG is going to be governed by the CSBG itself, and then also uniform guidance. And then it's very important that we understand both in order to do effective monitoring. So the CSBG, I mean, some of that's just brief history lesson. I'm sure some of you all know this very well, but at CSBG itself, it's the Community Service Block Grant. It traces its origins all the way back to the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964. Then it gets its name and its current form from the 1981 Omnibus Reconciliation Act, with obviously legislative updates and reauthorizations since then. But that's where CSBG comes from, and then uniform guidance is very much is obviously what the federal government issues. I'm an auditor. I'm an accountant. We're very, I don't know if you knew this, but auditors and accountants aren't super creative, and so we often refer to uniform guidance as the yellow book because that's what the book is issued. Federal government issues the uniform guidance in a yellow book. And so you may hear your auditor or whoever an auditor you're working with, or you may hear other accountants refer to uniform guidance as the yellow book, and that is why. But you have those two as the framework of cost allocation as we look into what it means to monitor cost allocation. So the key points of the CSBG Community Service Block Grant is you have three here. You have the tripartite board structure, which again, it doesn't really necessarily apply specifically to cost allocation, but it is a nuance of CSBG, and that there is the board is required to have three parts. I know as an auditor, when we test the grants, actually it's a compliance area that we have to look to see if they meet that requirement. And so that tripartite board structure, that might be something you see if you're reviewing, for example, you're monitoring an agency and you pull their audit report and you see a finding. It might be the tripartite board finding that they're not in compliance with that. I know as an auditor, I've had to issue a finding for that before, where an organization has not been able to fill that and meet that compliance requirement. There's also administrative cost limitations. As you all know, the CSBG imposes caps on administrative cost. It's important that monitors verify the costs are classified appropriately. And there's also organizational standards and their relevance. Just the CSBG requires that there be sound financial management practices, particularly directly connected to cost allocation policies, and then the documentations that are required surrounding that. Going to the other regulatory source, uniform guidance. This is obviously very much an overview and I'm sure a review for most of you. But uniform guidance and the cost principles included in there, they govern what costs can be charged to federal grants, and to be charged to the grants. any cost that's charged to a grant has to meet the 4 following criteria. It has to be allowable, so it has to be permitted under uniform guidance cost principles, allocable, reasonable, and consistent. So allowable, I know, again, I come from an audit perspective, and so there's always in the compliance supplement, there's allowable activity, allowable cost. When we're testing a grant, we have to determine if the sample that we picked, if the grant, the expenses being charged to that grant is allowable. What we have to do is we have to go in, and obviously as a monitor, you're doing similar, to a certain extent, you're doing similar procedures. You have to determine if the cost is allowable under the grant itself. So I know, like when we test CSBG, that one is, as we were talking about here in the chat, and CSBG in particular, it's very flexible, and it kind of depends on how the agency is functioning in its community. That is a pretty wide what they can spend it on. And so I know, like when we test CSBG in a lot of ways, I mean, we're having to look at the contract to determine if it's allowable and get a good sense of how the agency is using that funding to determine if those costs are allowable. It has to be allocable, so it has to be a cost that is you can actually see the benefit of that cost going to that grant. So you can't take an expense from another grant, and just because CSBG is open, you got funds you can draw down there, you can't take this expense from another grant and put it against CSBG. It has to be actually allocable to the grant. It has to be reasonable. It cannot be a cost that is both allowable and allocable, but it is an amount that is so high and astronomical compared to what a prudent person would pay for the same item. And it has to be consistent. So the cost itself has to be treated consistently across all funding sources, all that it benefits. A couple of key definitions that we will dive deeper into here in a moment. I know Amy's got some of this covered in her sections, but the first is a direct cost for a grant. So a direct cost is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. And this direct cost, indirect cost framework, this comes from uniform guidance. And it's not to be confused with admin and program framework, which comes from CSBG. There's some overlap there, but they are different. So this direct cost, indirect, that's the framework provided by uniform guidance. So the direct cost is exactly what it sounds like. It's, can you trace it directly to the program? So if we're thinking about, I'm just thinking about some other programs that are typically run through community action agencies, Head Start, for example. So if you have a Head Start teacher or educator who is in the classroom, who is watching the children, her salary or his salary is going to be a direct cost for the program. An indirect cost is a shared organizational cost that benefits multiple programs and cannot be directly assigned to a single activity. So this one's a little bit different in that it can't be directly charged back to a specific program, but it benefits multiple programs. So it's charged to the program, but it's indirect. And then cost allocation is the distribution of shared costs across all benefiting activities using a logical and document methodology, which we will get into here in a moment. All right, I'm going to push this poll number 3, and then Amy, I will turn it over to you. Hold on, that's the wrong one.
Gonna be number 2 full. Andrew.
It's going to be poll number 2.
Yeah, because I yeah.
¿Y por qué no lo puedo contestar?
Amy, well, I figured this out. Do you want to go ahead and move on to
Sure. So core concepts of cost allocation. So there are 5 fundamental principles that apply to all the methodologies, regardless of cost type or the program. All right,
I just relaunched the poll. Andrew.
Thank you.
Andrew, can you flip my slide?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. All right, so here are your 5 fundamental principles. The cost that you're looking at has to be necessary to whatever program it's being applied to, and then reasonable, which we saw as part of the guidance, allocable, so it has to be charged based on the actual benefit that's received by the program. And that actual benefit can be determined by your cost allocation methodology. Consistently treated, applied the same way across all your funding sources and over time period. This is not to say that the cost allocation methodology can't be changed, but that needs to be documented, and the time period under one grant really needs to all be handled consistently on how the allocation methodology is done. And then adequate documentation. There needs to be written policies. If it is an allocation methodology that's based on square footage, there should be documentation of how that was determined. If it's based on FTE, there needs to be worksheets and documentations on how that was determined, timesheets, and that sort of thing. Okay. All right, so here's your very common allocations that we see. Rent, utilities can be based on square footage. Your administrative staff, which can sometimes be charged via the indirect, that's going to be your folks who are not strictly administrative, like your HR person, or your financial people. You can get down to the level of allocating people by the number of checks that they run per program, number of transactions they process for each program, but that is administratively really difficult for the agencies to do. So in consulting work, I encourage them to come up with a method that is supportable, but that does not add so much administrative burden that it makes it very hard for them to keep up with and track. IT services can be device count, or it can be number of users. And payroll processing, you're going to use your number of employees oftentimes. And then insurance, you could use headcount, you could use exposure basis, or you can fall back to something that's a little less, that you could apply to more instances and use FTEs and determine how your FTEs are applied across the program. So the basis that you do choose has to reflect the actual benefit, not the convenience of, okay, I know I can just put all of this on these dollars, so that's what I'm going to do. Or I know that I still have money left in this grant over here, so this month I'm going to charge all of the utility bill to this grant. The basis has to be supportable.
Amy, if I could chime in here, we got some responses from our last poll. So the question was, which principle is most critical in cost allocation? And it looks like allocability won out barely. So just curious, do you have any hot takes on that?
I happen to agree with that.
There we go. Write it down.
I think allocability probably is the most critical piece, because if the cost methodology and allocation methodology has not been properly handled, that can throw everything off. That can throw off reasonableness. Documentation, maybe all that documentation supports that allocability, but you can tell from the documentation that something is very off with this method that they've determined. So that truly is, and then allocability obviously is where we get into, unfortunately, sometimes having to write findings or do a lot of training and technical assistance to help an agency get a better handle on what's going on. So I actually agree with that. All right, so characteristics of acceptable methodologies. So it needs to be logical. It needs to make intuitive sense given the nature of the cost. Like you wouldn't allocate the rent if you're using IT for IT or phones, if you're using the number of devices and who uses it and what programs they work in, if that's what you're using to allocate, then you're not going to use number of devices to allocate the rent type of thing. So it has to logically apply to the type of cost that it is. It has to be defensible and easy to explain. This is why when you go into some agencies and they have over-engineered their cost allocation process so that they have pools, and then it goes to this pool, and then it goes to this pool, and then you're getting down to the number of copies that the copier ran on this, the LIHEAP program used copier this many times, and then that's how you're allocating it. That's not easy to explain to an auditor, to a state monitor. It requires such a level of, they have to understand, okay, you went from here to here on this method, then from here to here on this method. It needs to be the simplest method that accomplishes the goal. Consistently applied, the same method is used period to period across all the grants. And again, you can change your methodology, but you don't want to do that in the middle of your grant period. The documentation needs to have acceptable support. They do need to have an existing cost allocation policy that is outlined, that documents what the documentation should be. The auditor needs that. You all as state monitors need that. They need that to make sure that they're being consistent and applying everything the way it should be. And then it does need to be periodically reviewed. I know Andrew and I have both gone to agencies where we start looking back in the books and they've been allocating exactly the same way with exactly the same percentages for years upon years upon years. And there's no documentation on a yearly basis that they went in, they looked at those allocations, they retested it somehow and determined that, yes, it was still a good allocation to use. So you do need to be able to see documentation that they are reviewing and updating their method if they've gotten new grants, if their operations have somehow changed. They may not have gotten a new grant, but maybe they've added a new program under that grant. Well, how are they determining things? Okay. All right, common CSBG shared cost areas. So obviously executive management is going to be your leadership time, your executive director, your operations person, that it benefits across multiple programs. Your HR support, they're going to be doing your recruitment, making sure everybody has health insurance and that the agency is getting the most reasonable price they can on that. Compliance with the many HR rules that are out there. IT systems are a shared item because they're maintaining everybody's computer. Finance, facilities or occupancy, that's probably the one that most people use as examples when they talk about this, just because it's very easy to talk about. That's the one I tend to use as well. And then your reception or front desk staff, whether or not it's a facility that takes walk-ins, and so you have someone who's just seeing everybody as they come in the door, or if you have a call-in system where you have somebody who's answering, or several people answering multiple phone lines and then directing the people to the right department. That's a shared cost.
All right, we're gonna launch another poll here, see if I can do better than last time. Which allocation basis would generally be most appropriate for allocating occupancy cost? Number of grants, employee salaries, square footage, or program budgets. Amy, do you need to reverse the question? Which one do you think is the least appropriate for allocating occupancy costs?
Well, that's a hard number of grants, I'm going to go with number of grants is the least appropriate. And this is another thing that some of you might see when you go in and monitor your agencies. I have seen agencies that put their costs to the grants based on what they budgeted for. I see that a lot, actually, and that's not an appropriate method. But I see that more in the agencies that don't truly understand cost allocation, and they think that they're going to charge 112, but this is their program, but their program budget for the year for rent's $5,000. So every single month they're just going to charge 1/12 of that $5,000, and that's not an appropriate cost. Can they explain that that's what they're doing? Absolutely. So it meets that easy to explain, but it's not based on anything. A budget is not the real picture of what's going on, and your costs have to be allocated based on something that's in the real picture of what's going on. But number of grants is definitely not okay.
We'll go ahead and end this poll. It looks like square footage won out. So which allocation basis would generally be most appropriate for allocating occupancy cost? Square footage. What do you think about that winning? Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Square footage. You can allocate your occupancy costs based on FTEs. That might be more equity. Agencies need to look at their overall programming structure and make sure that using square footage is not going to drive a disproportionate amount of the costs to one program, or is FTEs a better way to handle it? Or in thinking about Head Start, is number of children served the better way to handle it? So they can use the method as long as it's supportable. Maybe using FTEs doesn't drive as much indirect cost to their Head Start dollars as using square footage does, because they may have a good sized footprint in child caring centers. But using FTEs is still a perfectly appropriate method for them to use. So you have to, as going in as monitors, you have to hear their explanation of the methodology that they've chosen, and you evaluate whether or not they are still using a reasonable method, even though it may not be the most common one that's used. Mm-hmm. Because some of it is based on the needs of their agency.
All right. We'll move on now to the next section. This is I think probably the meat of all of this. So take it away.
All right. Indirect costs versus administrative costs. They are not the same thing. An indirect cost uniform, that's from the uniform guidance piece of things. An indirect cost is strictly a cost that cannot be assigned to only one grant. So back to rent, for example, that's an indirect cost because rent on a facility benefits everything going on in that facility. Now, if that facility is only handling one program, then yes, that rent can be assigned and it's a direct cost. But if it's the main building for the agency, and within that building, they have the executive leadership, they have CSBG caseworkers, they have LIHEAP caseworkers, their weatherization manager works out of there, their compliance officer is there. That now becomes an indirect cost because there are multiple places that rent needs to be charged. But in the same venue, that all of that rent is not an administrative cost. A portion of it probably is. The portion of it that's reserved for the finance department or the HR department, that should fall under the administrative, the the administrative cap on the grant. But the rest of it, although it's an indirect cost, it would be charged directly and not count against the organization's administrative cap. Wow, I just said that whole thing on the title slide. Sorry. Okay, because now I'm going to explain it all again. Sorry about that.
It's all right. It's worth repeating.
So administrative really describes the purpose of the activity, and indirect describes the method that allocates the cost. So a lot of monitors and a lot of agencies, for that matter, assume that anything that is indirect is also administrative, or that administrative costs are all indirect. That's not true on either of those cases. So the indirect wording, which is coming out of uniform guidance, is asking how are the costs being allocated to the funding sources. And CSBG, which is where the administrative side of the equation is coming from, is what type of activity is the cost supporting? Is it truly an administrative activity, or does it help advance the program objectives? So a cost can be direct and administrative. It can be indirect and programmatic, or it can be indirect and administrative. It can be all the things. Both things can be true at once. So administrative costs are going to be, as you can see on here, relate to management, oversight, governance, general organizational operations, things, board activities, writing the agency-wide plan, the succession planning, compliance oversight just in general, executive leadership, making sure the payroll tax returns get filed on time. That's an administrative cost. So is the activity supporting the organizational management, or is it supporting the direct mission of giving services to the client? That's what determines if it's administrative. It's a different question to ask on whether or not it's an indirect. So that's going to be a shared cost across multiple programs. So that can be your rent, your utilities, your IT. You might have your receptionist. He or she can function as would be multi-program. They're not intake staff. The reception front desk person is not intake, but it's the same concept that they are seeing anybody no matter what program. And so they are an indirect because they're going to be assigned out. And then your central accounting system, it is, you're not serving the agencies are not serving anyone if the checks aren't getting cut, or if the dollars are not getting tracked appropriately. So your accounting system, your audit each year, that benefits the service delivery on multiple programs, because you fail your audit, you could get your funding pulled. So those are indirect costs that are not necessarily administrative. All right, so here's the overlap type of situation. So administrative and indirect. So your executive director salary can go into your indirect pool, because your executive director might be working some of their time on activities that directly benefit the program objectives. However, there's definitely going to be a portion of the executive director's salary that is involved in the general governance and organization and management of the agency itself. That's going to be things like board meetings, when they're at their desk, writing the white paper to send out to staff, reviewing things like that. That would count towards the organization's administrative cap, that portion of the salary. But it's also, that salary could be, this piece is indirect because it's directly benefiting the programs. And then this piece here, that's the administrative side, is somehow in there and should be somehow in the agency's administrative cost pool, and then getting dispersed on the administrative, as they spend out their administrative and count towards that cap. So then you have program and indirect. So those are together when you have things like intake people who might see, they might take in, they're helping people fill out weatherization applications, CSBG services, LIHEAP services, whatever, in housing, if you have an agency that provides housing services. Those are indirect, those salaries are going to be indirect, but they are directly benefiting the program. So they're all a program cost, which means that none of them would count towards the administrative cap on the grant. And then you have program indirect. So that's going to be your direct folks, your individual who's sitting there, the overtime caseworker on CSBG who is working the training plan with the client being served, who is tracking that client's progress and that kind of thing. That is definitely advancing the program, and that is only chargeable to one program. Therefore, it is a direct cost. Yes. Karen is correct. That does complicate this. We're going to dive more into that in part 2. This is kind of laying a framework, and we're laying that framework, and as we all know, there's always a wrinkle in the framework.
Oh, yes.
So, so we're going to lay that in, but thank you for asking that. But yes, stay tuned. So side-by-side matrix. This is going to get y'all to come back in June.
Exactly. That's the hook right there.
That's the hook for June. I promise we did not pay Karen separately to help us out with that. So here's your community action agency cost examples. Executive director salary, administrative and indirect. Sure, but maybe not all of it. Finance director overseeing all the grants. Administrative, yes, that's administrative. Indirect, also that. HR department staff, yes. And indirect, definitely. So then down in the bottom half here, we have ones where your answers might be some combination of the two. Weatherization program manager is not administrative, but it's a direct program operation because that's the only program they're being charged on. So it's also not indirect. That's a direct cost. And you can see through the other examples, and I'm probably, unless somebody has a question, I'm not going to read you the slide because that's ridiculous. And we can all see. So you can see that you have to be able to make a determination. And I know over the years, I've seen a lot of questions at the agency, definitely at the agency level. And because I did subrecipient monitoring as a finance director, I did subrecipient monitoring of our subrecipients and would frequently encounter questions about but this is indirect. It shouldn't count towards the admin. And so you do have to really fully understand and be able to, because part of the role as monitors is to provide that training and technical assistance side of things where you can help them understand that administrative and direct are not necessarily the same thing. Okay. All right. Is this? Okay. Yes. Expand on how board meeting expenses. Okay. So they're administrative but they can also be indirect because you can have sometimes in your board meeting, like time that your board spends reviewing, the agency plan or the area plan that specifically speaks to the different services that the grants are going to provide. That would be more of an indirect service that the board is, or that the time spent preparing that, if the executive director, program directors are already being charged either indirectly across or directly, but that might be time that the executive director spends on that and then coming up with the plan to present it to the board. You can make a case for that being indirect as well as administrative. That's when the line gets really fuzzy. But going over the financials for the board, that's the finance director doing that. That is admin all the way. Okay, this is still me, sorry.
Yes,
So
you are.
key monitoring questions. These are the kind of things you want to ask when you're looking at at what you're going to review, your disbursement sample, or if you just pick a month and you're reviewing that. What activity is being performed? Is it supporting the management of the organization, or is it supporting the direct services? Is it shared across multiple programs? And if so, how is it being allocated to those programs? Is there an approved indirect cost rate or cost allocation plan? And you need to look at that and review it. I know some states have gone to issuing state level, if the organization doesn't have a federally mandated indirect cost rate. I know there are some states that have gone to issuing state level indirect cost rates. And so they may have that state level indirect cost rate, or they may still be operating on just strictly on a cost allocation plan. And if they have a submitted and approved cost allocation plan, then part of the monitoring is to make sure that what they are actually performing as their cost allocation ties to the methodology they have outlined in that cost allocation plan. And does their allocation methodology appear reasonable and consistent? So here's some of the common mistakes that we have encountered. All indirect costs are administrative. No. Some indirect costs, like the rent example, support program services. The indirect cost rate equals the CSBG administrative cap. No. Only the administrative portion of indirect costs counts towards the CSBG administrative cap. And then program supervision is always administrative. Not really. Program supervision by and large is going to be a programmatic cost. It may be indirect because it may be a program supervisor who works across 3 or 4 different programs, but it's not administrative in nature because that program supervisor is directly related to getting the services to the client. Okay, and then the key takeaways, function versus allocation. That is administrative versus indirect. 4 possibilities. It can be administrative, it can be direct, it can be both, it can be neither, which means it's direct. The categories are not mutually exclusive. So, but 2 things can be true at the same time. And this part of the reason we're doing this is the CSBG admin cap. So part of the CSBG policy, I know now from the federal level, the CSBG federal guidance, the states have to pass 90% of their CSBG allocation through to the subrecipient. And they can keep the 10%, but they can only use 5%, a maximum of 5% of the total award can be put towards administrative activities, including the monitoring. And then the states are in contracts with all of the subrecipients, and there should be, yeah, I'm getting there. There should be an administrative cap indicated when that contract is negotiated with the community action agency. They should know what their administrative cap is. 10%, the CAA that I worked at, our administrative cap for CSBG dollars was 10% of the dollars. States can put more restrictive, they can be more restrictive than that. but that really varies by state. So it should be in their contract with the CAA. It should be in that contract how much they're allowed to have as their administrative cap on that award. Did that answer the question? Okay. Okay, great.
Probably.
Yeah, well, yes. I love the idea that there are states out there that don't require an administrative cap.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Um, so okay, and then is this Andrew? I need to hop off.
Do.
Yeah, I
So,
apologize, everyone. I was double booked for a board meeting
yes.
today,
So
and so Andrew's going to take it from here. I'm really
I
looking
will.
forward to seeing everybody at the June meeting. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you, Amy. All right, so that was I'll just pick up where Amy left off, and like we said, she was booked today, starting at 3. That's part of why we wanted to push all of the like hands-on stuff to our June call. That way we can have both of us there for that. So I'll just keep going here with our presentation. We have a little bit more to cover here in the slides. So please feel free to keep blowing up the chat. That would be great. I'll be very honest with y'all. I come from an auditor perspective. So some of the nuance, some of the questions that were being asked to Amy, you might get a lot of me saying, that's a great question. We're going to save that for Amy when she gets back. But please feel free to continue to ask any questions you have, and I will do my best to respond, or if not, we'll mark them down for next time so we can address them then. But just kind of going into the types of indirect cost rates here. So there's 3 that are kind of broken up in these 3 categories. The first being the NICRA, the federal negotiated cost rate. The de minimis rate, you see 15% there. That can actually vary by grant, but the official used to be 10% and is now bumped up to 15%. And there's also state approved methodologies. Some administrative, well, a lot of this she's really already covered in this section, but just some general cost considerations. I mean, I think the biggest thing I know, just hearing from Hugh earlier, and I completely understand where CSBG has the framework of admin versus program, and then uniform guidance has the framework of indirect versus direct. And so it can become very confusing, kind of trying to work through those particular items. And so just being able to understand that you can have admin and direct, or you can't have admin and indirect. That there's some, while they're not exactly the same, there is some overlap. So let's see what else. So some questions here, just as we wrap up her section, and then I get into my section. It is monitoring questions to ask regarding indirect costs. So again, going back to that uniform guidance framework of direct versus indirect, is there an approved indirect cost rate? Whether it be the NICRA or de minimis or some sort of state approved. Is the allocation methodology documented? That's something I know, coming from an audit background. That's one of the biggest things that we need to see. Is it written down? Has it been written down? Not scribbled on a piece of paper when you come walking in the door, or something that the CFO or the finance officer kind of has in their head. They're like, yeah, this is how I've always done it. No, but can you produce a piece of paper or a document that hopefully is actively updated? And is it documented? Is it consistent? I know that I've worked with some nonprofits where we've gone in, we've tested their cost allocation, and we test throughout the year, and it's not the way that at least the way that their cost allocation is properly documented. It's not the way that they're actually doing it. And they would change it based on how much dollars they had to pull down based on certain types of grants and the time of the year and the close of certain grant years and all of that. And that's not good. If it's not being consistently applied, if it's not if the agency or the organization is not following the written cost allocation plan, that is an issue, and that, at least from as an auditor, that's something that's going to result in a finding to the organization. Is our costs being double charged? This actually can be a pretty common error. It's not always on purpose. Sometimes it can happen just purely out of human error. But do you have some costs that the agency or the organization is thrown into the indirect cost pool, but then they also turn around and they double charge it and they actually direct charge it to the grant? That's a big no-no. Obviously, it's double dipping. And it's actually, it can be a pretty common error with cost allocation. And then I know Amy touched on this earlier, but are the allocations being updated periodically? Is this a document? So hey, when you go in to the agency that you monitor and you ask for the cost allocation plan, do you pull it, and does it look like it hasn't been touched in 30 years or 20 years? So, maybe they've got the second one where they have an allocation plan and it's documented. But do you look at a little timestamp there on the bottom, and is it from like 2003? Hopefully not, but you want to make sure that when you're looking at these cost allocation plans, that they are being updated regularly. And actually, it's really important for the health of the agency that they're being updated regularly, so that they can be able to actually, their cost allocation can match their current operations in their organization.
Andrew, before you
Yes,
move
sir.
on to this next slide, I just want to
Yeah.
make sure that you've seen the post in the chat from Cassie.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Sure.
Yes, we can definitely do that. So Cassie would like for us to expand on the CAA admin cap, state requirements, a federal state reference with de minimis rate, with examples for the discussion. Yes, we actually, our hope and our plan here is to use this first meeting as kind of building the knowledge base, and then going into our next meeting actually having hands-on examples. I know that we have some templates already that we use in our firm on our outsourced CFO side, where we work through cost. Basically, we have our templates that we use for cost allocation for organizations like the ones that you monitor. And so, yes, we will certainly include that. Thank you for putting that there in the chat, and we will add that to the agenda for next month's meeting. So common risk areas with indirect cost. Again, just to kind of remind everyone of the separation. This is working from that uniform guidance framework. So direct versus indirect. So directly, can you directly charge it to a grant versus does it benefit multiple programs, as opposed to the CSPG framework of admin versus program. So common risk areas in these indirect costs. Unsupported or arbitrary percentages. This can be pretty common in agencies where maybe they don't fully understand how cost allocation operates or how it should work, where they just kind of have these arbitrary percentages. Well, this is how much I always charge for this expense. This is how much I charge this grant. And you go and you start kind of digging, you start pulling on that thread a little bit, and it turns out there really is nothing to back it up. It's just what they've always done, or it's how they were trained, or whatever. Another one, just outdated allocation percentages. That's similar to when I was talking about the outdated allocation plans. The percentages they've not been updated, even though there's been a change in the programs, change in staffing, change in operations. Really, so for an agency or an organization, they really should be updating their cost allocation plan. Really, they should have a schedule of when they update it. We like to see, I know from an audit side, we like to see at least once or twice a year. Quarterly is usually the preferred. I think monthly gets a little bit too onerous in the sense of like just tedious for management to have to do it on a monthly basis. But I do know some organizations that do update on a monthly basis. But in addition to having a regular schedule of when they update, they also need to have if they need to have kind of triggers, like if something happens in their agency, they need to go back and update it, even if it's not the end of the quarter, end of the year, or whatever. So if a big grant that they've had for years, they don't get it, and it expires and they're not renewed, well, they need to go back and update their cost allocation plan. If their FTE count, dips and drops by like 10% for whatever reason because of turnover, maybe that's a reason for them. They need to go back and update it, even if it's not the end of the quarter, end of the month, or end of the year. So that's something that that's a control in order to prevent outdated allocation percentages. Another common risk area is funding-based allocations. So that's allocating costs based on available funding rather than actual use. And this somewhat goes with what Amy had said earlier about how allocating based on the number of grants or allocating based on budgeted numbers. I know I've worked with one organization who they contracted with a outside accountant. They decided to outsource their CFO work. And this accountant, while really good in a lot of different areas, did not have a ton of experience with grants. And so they took one look at cost allocation and they said, you know what, I think we can make this a lot simpler. We're going to take it and we're going to base it off of budgeted amounts we think we're going to get from our grants. When we came in at the end of the year and looked at their cost allocation plan and realized that they never updated to actual, and realized that it was based off of budgeted amounts on their grants, we had to give them a finding because that's not allowed. That's not allowed under uniform guidance, is that you cannot use budgeted amounts for your cost allocation. Now you can start with that, but you have to update it to actual at some point, as a part of your regular update of the cost allocation plan. Then the last one, I know we've already touched on this, but just inconsistent treatment across grants. So whatever the allocation plan is, it has to be consistently applied across grants. You can't be charging more to one grant compared to the other because on this one grant you can get more money, or you have more money to pull down than the other one or whatever. The cost allocation plan has to be applied consistently across all of your programs. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get this poll launched. What is the most common issue that you encounter during your monitoring? What's the most common indirect cost issue you encounter during monitoring? I'm going to see if I can find it. Lack of documentation, inconsistent application, unsupported time allocations, double charging, or misclassification of admin cost. Yeah, just think it back. The one thing that while y'all fill out that poll, one thing that Amy had said earlier that kind of triggered a memory for me. She's talking about complicated cost allocation plans. And I remember early on in my career, I was just starting to kind of wrap my head around what a cost allocation plan was and how it worked. And again, I think for me, the hardest thing about cost allocation plans is every single one is different. And they need to be, because every single nonprofit or agency is a little bit different, but it's really hard to learn them when you don't have one standard one you can look back to. But I remember I sat down and I was meeting with, I think it was myself and then someone else on the job and the client. And she was very proud of her cost allocation plan, very proud of it. And we kind of read through it. We had a bunch of questions. There was multiple cost pools, and it just went just on and on and on. And she sat down with us and she goes, so this cost allocation plan is a multi-step approach. And she pretty much was alluding to the fact that she didn't think that we could understand it. And looking back now, I wish I had said, well, you know what? It actually has to be understandable. And the fact that I can't understand it, while that might reflect on my intelligence, it also may mean yours is a little too complicated. So that was just, I was smiling about that earlier. Looks like we have most of the responses in. So again, the question being, what is the most common issue that you encounter during messed it up completely. What is the most common indirect cost issue you encounter during monitoring? It looks like there is about to close the poll, but currently looks like lack of documentation is winning out, followed pretty closely by inconsistent application and unsupported time allocations. And I would say from both mainly from the audit side that I've looked at with cost allocations, I would say that this is very much similar. Generally, when we go in and we're looking, part of what we have to do, and we're going to talk about this next, but part of what we have to do when we're testing cost allocations, we have to walk it through. We have to follow it through. And a lot of times what I will find is I'll find a really good cost allocation plan. It looks great. I think it's been updated. It's a PDF and there's no coffee stains on it or anything like that. It looks good. But then when I go in and I'm trying to actually follow through an expense. So like, all right, you say this is how you allocate utilities across your programs. And I compare the plan to what I'm seeing on the June 2025 utility bill. It doesn't exactly match. And then when it doesn't match, I start looking for more documentation and I can't find it. There's a lot of like, well, you just have to take my word for it, or I know this is how we do it. So I completely relate to the fact that lack of documentation is definitely a big issue. Inconsistent application, I think that also is one that is very, I also see very much. A lot of times when I see a lack of, when there's inconsistency, I think a lot of that seems to stem from just not fully understanding how the allocation plan works, but then also how it works when you have multiple grant years that coincide over one fiscal year. So I know I've seen that before. One organization we worked with that consistently got cost allocation plan findings is that they were being inconsistent in how they applied it across their across their fiscal year when they had multiple grants that ended in different at different times throughout their fiscal year. All right. I know we're getting here to the home stretch of today's call. And we're just going to we have one more section here. Again, this being kind of this is like our knowledge base that we're all kind of getting on the same page here as far as what cost allocation is. And we're just beginning the discussion. And then we will start in our June call. That's when we'll really get into just the hands-on work and some of the case studies that we've already pulled together. All right, so monitoring focus areas and common findings. So effective monitoring, I'll read off the slide here, but effective monitoring goes beyond checking boxes. It requires reviewing policies, testing financial records, and verifying that documented methodologies are actually being followed in practice. So what's important here, and I fully recognize I'm probably preaching to the choir, but an agency can have a beautiful cost allocation plan. Like I was saying a few minutes ago, it can be pretty. It can, like there's no coffee stains on it. It's actually a PDF. It's not paper anymore. It's not crumpled up. It looks good. It's been updated recently. It covers everything they need to it covers everything, you know, all of their programs and all of the different, it's up to date as far as their current operations and all of that. That's all well and good. But if they're not taking that and they're not actually using it and applying it to all of their expenses, then what's the point of it? There's a problem there. That's a big problem. So part of the role of the monitor, part of the role of any other external auditor, whoever's coming in, one of their roles is to make sure that what's written down as far as a policy and a procedure within whatever the scope of the review or the monitoring is, that they're actually following that policy and procedure in the day-to-day operations of the organization. So a number of items, policies, and procedures that should be reviewed by monitors. I know this is a part of the CSBG program when you go in and you monitor agencies, is you need to look for that written allocation plan. So this comes from, I know it comes from CSBG and also from Uniform Guidance, is that the allocation plan, it has to be written down, has to be documented. That's a good question, Angela. Angela asked here in the chat, what are the best sources to reference in a monitoring report when there are cost allocation findings? CSBG Act, Uniform Guidance, GAP, something else. Generally, it would not be GAP, just because that's not going to be applicable to the grants and cost allocation. I would look at Uniform Guidance first, and then the CSBG as well. If it's specifically a CSBG issue. But I think what I would go to first is Uniform Guidance and the cost principles there included there. So the written, you should certainly, when you are going in your monitoring, you should most definitely be looking and asking for the written allocation plan. Generally, I've just learned this over the years. I have to ask for the most recent one. Sometimes you'll ask for the cost allocation plan and the finance director, whoever, will just like pull one, and it's not the most up to date. So I always get, so I ask, like, I can have the most recent one. Can I have, what have you just updated? Can I see it? Then you want to see the indirect cost documentation. So whatever it is, it's governing their indirect cost, whether it's the rate agreement, their de minimis election, or I know we're speaking to monitors across all the states. So whatever state approved methodology that the agency would have on file, and then just making sure that it's applicable to the period being monitored. And if it's not, I know sometimes, like for example, the NICRA, the negotiated rate agreement, especially with the delays and kind of what's going on as far as just how slow with the shutdowns and just all the things going on at the federal level. A lot of the rate agreements and all that they're late. They're really late. And so perhaps you might actually be looking at, when you ask for, can I have your most recent rate agreement or negotiated cost agreement, you might see something that's outdated. And so what you have to do there is you just have to pull on that string and say, okay, what are they telling you to do? What do you have something where you have some sort of extension, even if it's just in writing, you have some sort of like provisional agreement. So there is a chance, especially right now, that some of what you're looking at when you're looking at like a negotiated cost rate is that it might be out of date, but you would then need to take that next step and get a sense of, okay, why is it out of date? Is it because there have been delays on the federal level, or is it because the agency has somehow been negligent or has lapsed in what they're having to do on their side? And then you need to look and see for the approval process. So has this, you want to make sure that the document you're looking at, it's actually been approved at the appropriate level. Some things don't have to be approved, always by the board or always by the executive director, but just make sure that what you're looking at has been appropriately approved. Just reading the chat here for a minute. Yes, I can provide a list of documents that should be provided to support the cost allocation plan. Here we are. Thank you for that. Cassie also asked, do you state board approved costs? Do you state board approved cost allocation plan? Also, can you please provide a list of documents that should be provided to support the cost allocation plan? So here are when we go in and we test cost allocation plans, whether it be a monitoring or it be a for an audit. Like I was saying earlier, we do what's called a walkthrough. So we take the allocation plan, we read it. That's great weekend reading, by the way. I know we got a long weekend coming up, so if you have cost allocation plans you got to read, might be a good time to do that. But you read it, you kind of get a sense of what's going on, what the programs are, and then how it operates within the organization. And so once you have that base of knowledge, then you walk through some expenses. Generally, what we'll do is we will test if there's major. Some cost allocation plans they have very specific allocations for like recurring expenses. So I know I mentioned utilities earlier. So utilities, they say in their allocation plan, this is how we test utilities. Okay, well, we're going to separate that out and we'll follow that specific expense through. Utilities are great because they're recurring. They're almost always have to be allocated. Rarely are directly charged. And so we would pick, with them being monthly, we would pick, 1 to 2 to 3 months worth and make sure that what they're saying in their plan, it's being allocated or that's being done. And the way that we walk that through is we'll look at the source documents. So we'll look at the invoices or the bill. In this case, we will trace it to the general ledger and how that's being coded, how those expenses are being coded to the different programs. So for example, this is very simple. If they say that their utility bill is going to be allocated 30% Head Start, 30% CSVG, and then 30% LIHEAP. Again, very simple, probably not very realistic. As the auditor, as the monitor, we want to come in, we want to see and say we're monitoring CSVG specifically. I'd want to see, okay, my total utility bill, I see on my source document, my utility invoice, I see it's $100. Okay, then for this month, I should see $33 being applied to CSVG because it's a third of the 100. So that would be what we would do there. That'd be one of our walkthroughs. Then other documentation you need to look at for like payroll, for any sort of payroll. So the executive director's salary, that's usually one we will also walk through and we will test. And that can get a little bit, utilities really easy. Payroll, when you start getting into payroll, it can get a little bit more tricky because some of the employees, for example, like they will consistently split their time like 50-50 between 2 grants. Well, that's not necessarily indirect and then being put into the allocation pool. That's them they can show on their timesheet they spent half their time direct charge to one grant, half their time direct charge to another grant. So generally for an employee, when you're testing like an indirect cost for an employee, you're generally testing like the C-suite. So the executive director, the CFO, and those are the ones where then you have to go in, you do look at the allocation plan and you do exactly like you would do for the utility bill. You would see what it says on the allocation plan. You would look at the pay stub, and then you would trace and look at their GL and make sure that what they're saying, what they say they're going to do, they're actually doing. Another thing, just along these lines, you do want, it's really important it's being done consistently. I know I mentioned earlier about how generally when I see a cost allocation plan, not being applied consistently. It's when it's when they have multiple grants that end in the same fiscal year and in their same fiscal year. And so if they start getting up to the end of one grant, the start of a new one, they have other grants that are starting ending at different times. That's generally when they're accrual basis, testing on accrual basis. To answer the question there in the chat, that's generally where I see that cost allocation is not always applied consistently. So that's where it's important, like just to go back to a very simple utility example. That's where I wouldn't just want to pick one month. I would want to pick maybe 2 to 3 and not just back-to-back months. So maybe like, if this is June 30th, year end for an agency, I'd want to see maybe July, so the beginning of their fiscal year, December, and then maybe April. You just kind of there throughout the year and be able to see that, okay, they are applying this at the same throughout each of the 3 months that I selected. And then the next one, I mean, it's not exactly specific to CSBG, but you want to see it's being compared across grants. So again, this might not fall within the scope of monitoring for CSBG, but say for whatever reason you had a different scope and you're looking at the whole cost allocation plan, you'd want to make sure that they are applying it consistently across the grants, that they're not just picking one and dumping all one cost there, but instead they're spreading it consistently across the grants. And then verify the method is actually being followed. That's just going back to, we call it walkthroughs in the world that I come from, the audit world. You go and you walk through an actual expense. You take it from start to finish and basically recreate what the finance director did or the accountant or whoever did when they were coding that and processing that expense. I know we're getting close to the end of time here, so I'm going to start to speed up. But just,
Andrew,
yes, sir.
Sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted
Yeah,
to make you aware that Cassie modified her previous question about the board approval of the cost allocation plan, and she added a couple of other comments in there, so you may want to review that before we end. Sure.
Okay, thank you. Confirm the full board must approve cost allocation plan. It's actually a really good question. I'm not sure if that's required or not. You're going to have to, I'm going to write that one down, Cassie, and I'm going to do some research on that. I know that I don't, as of right now, maybe I need to start doing this. I know I don't check to see if the board approved the cost allocation plan. I know they have to, I know obviously they have to approve budget and all of that, but I'll go back and check on cost allocation plan. Finally, can finance director or finance committee make changes prior to board approval? So that's I will also mark that one down. That'll go in with your first question. So thank you for that. Now, that gives us some things to look into and just to double check. I'm not aware currently of any requirement the board has to approve. Every board has to approve cost allocation plan, but I will double check on that. It does not require board approval in the organizational standards. Okay, yes, and I know that uniform guidance doesn't specifically require it either. Uniform guidance just has kind of the broad categories of what a cost allocation plan has to be, written, consistent, everything we've been talking about, written, consistent, allocable, all of that. Let me see. I just have a few more slides, and I know we're down to 1 minute, so I'm going to pick just a few of the ones that I think are super important. We'll save the rest for next time. Just a few red flags to look for when you are going in, you're monitoring cost allocation. Look for rounded percentages. Very rarely will you have one where it's just perfectly clean, 50-50 or 33-33, 34. Look for percentages to never change. Again, I know we talked about that earlier, but okay, thank you, Rolanda. It must be documented that the board has reviewed it. So there we go. Look for large year-end adjustments. That's actually really that is typically a red flag. Is that organizations maybe have not drawn down as much as they should have because they don't have a really effective or up-to-date cost allocation plan, and all of a sudden they're realizing, oh my goodness, we're going to leave all this money on the table, and all of a sudden they magically have all these this ability to, their allocation, have this huge adjustment to pull down all this money they think that they may have left on the table. So look for those large year-end adjustments. Look for no support. Those are just some general red flags. Let's see. I'm just going to push straight to the poll. I do know, Hugh, what I will do is we'll provide the slide deck so you can send it out if you would like, because I know I'm going to speed through these. But I just had two polls here, and this will help us kind of feed for our next session. So I'm going to push these two polls if I can. I can manage to handle the technology, and then we'll call it quits for today and look forward to our next call. Or not, because I can't press the buttons right. Here we go. 1 second. All right, this is mainly just to kind of help us know how to kind of set up our next call. But after today's session, how prepared do you feel to review CSBG cost allocation practices? And then we have a second question here just to end our time together. And again, this is just to help us do a couple things. And we kind of have our next 3 calls planned out, our next 3 sessions. So part 2 cost allocation will be in June. We'll do cost allowability and like monthly, kind of reviewing monthly statements. We'll do that in July. And then in August, we'll hit internal controls and I believe procurement. But our question there for our last question there, poll number 7, that's just good to know for if there are future sessions. What would be good to know? What would y'all like to have trainings on? So I'm going to end the poll here in just a minute because I know that we are over time by 2 minutes, and I'm sorry about that. But it's looking like maybe today's session was helpful for most of you, and so I'm really, really grateful that y'all joined. It looks like time and effort reporting is getting a lot of attention, that and monitoring techniques. So that's not surprising. And that is something that we definitely hope to be able to talk about here in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and end these polls. And thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to present to you all, meet with you all today. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Hugh.
Thanks a bunch, Andrew, and please thank Amy, who couldn't be with us at the end. She did a fantastic job as well. Thank you all for joining us today. Please join us again in June for the follow-up discussion. We'll do a little bit more hands-on exercises, but I want you all to thank Andrew for sticking with us to the end. I think this was a great discussion, especially all the comments and questions that came in from all of you. So again, thanks, Andrew. Really appreciated all your work putting this together. Looks like folks really enjoyed it. All right, so we will see you next session, which is in June. And if you have any questions in the meantime, please feel free to send them to us, and we'll make sure that Andrew and Amy get those answered in the material that they present. So we'd love to have that type of format already prepared for you. So thanks a lot. Have a great long weekend. We'll see you next week.